When people talk about video games, there's quite a few terms that get thrown around rather haphazardly. I think realism is a big one. It's one of my huge pet peeves. People use the term realism just as often as they use the term immersion to claim that a game needs something without really considering what games are all about, which is the player having fun. Another big one is depth. A lot of people like to look at a game and say, well, as long as it has depth, it'll be good. Oh, this game doesn't look like it has any depth, it's going to be straight trash. And it doesn't really work that way. While I do agree that depth can be important, I think saying that depth instantly equals fun is a massive fallacy. I do think depth and fun can influence one another negatively and positively, and I do think they should be tuned in consideration to one another while also being tuned separately. But to say that more depth instantly equals fun just isn't true. I mean, look at anyone who plays EVE Online. That's a certain community that game taps into. People who appreciate that depth and see the value that depth provides, but that doesn't make it fun for everyone. In fact, a lot of people would say the depth in a game like EVE Online really sucks a lot of the fun out of it for them. They just want to fly spaceships. So it's also a very subjective topic, but I do think there is a discussion to be had there. So today, we're going to be taking a look at the knowns and unknowns of depth in Anthem, keeping in mind that if the game isn't any fun at the end of the day, no one's really going to care about depth. And an excess of depth can also sometimes strip the fun out of said experience. Now, if we want to look at Anthem on face value and just say, well, what are you going to be able to do in the game? You're going to run through its main story. You've got a set of primary arcs you're going to complete called the critical path. That's going to help you unlock all 4 of the javelins. That's going to help you push towards the max level cap and towards endgame, where you'll start to dive into the game's late game experience and end game experience, which is going to revolve around strongholds, legendary contracts, whatever happens post-launch, and the idea of really building out and tweaking your javelins. That's the overarching premise. But when we look towards Anthem's core gameplay loop, that's where we see the first instance of what many would refer to as depth. And that, of course, revolves around the 4 javelins and everything you're going to do to modify them to make them fit a certain play style for a certain experience you're looking to have with the javelin within the world of Anthem. So you've got whatever javelin you pick. You've got 2 primary firearms, you've got 3 pieces of gear or abilities in your loadout, you've got a selection of components that can further modify and provide additional perks and stat bonuses, and then you have the inscriptions that exist on basically all of those things. This is another layer of stat modifiers and perks that might work with one another or against one another to allow the player to really fine-tune certain builds, again, for certain playstyles and certain purposes. This is, I think, very much where players are going to spend the majority of their time if they end up enjoying the game and making their way into the late game. You'll be running through those different difficulty levels, you'll be unlocking new layers of loot across the different rarities, and you'll be searching for those perfect drops with those perfect inscriptions to fit the playstyle or the build you're looking to create. And that's a pretty extensive process when it's done correctly. When you look at a game like Diablo, Monster Hunter, The Division, I think does this very well. We can throw Warframe in there. These are games that have a lot of extensive opportunity for experimentation from the player to start testing the waters with the build, to then maybe start experimenting with it a little bit, and then if they decide to go all in on it, there's a huge process that follows. You actually have to collect the loot, you have to search for the right roles, you start to build out that loadout for whatever it might be. Maybe it's single target DPS, maybe it's AoE damage, group DPS, maybe you're looking for more of a support role, so you want the ability to really buff your teammates more often. Any number of those things can take a long time to make a really great build towards that, and you'll always kind of be working towards that top end, trying to min-max it if you choose to go that far with it. So there's stages to making a build, and that's just one build. I think The Division actually did an incredible job for this. When we talk about modern shared world loot shooters, The Division was really good at letting players make all of these crazy fun builds across the different pieces of equipment and then the different gear with the different perks and the different roles. Anthem is looking to deliver something similar to that. So if the player finds the core experience fun, there's a good chance there's a lot of depth here, and hopefully that depth will create an experience that is in turn really rewarding and really enjoyable, where the player genuinely feels like the builds they make and the time they invest into those builds gives them some sort of an end result that equates to a genuine reward within itself. It says, oh, hey man, look at all the work I put into this build. Now look at what I can do. Look at my single target damage. Look how I can support my team. You know, that's going to be a huge factor for this game. Now, if we want to talk more about the unknowns of depth and what I consider to be extremely subjective depth, we can talk a little bit more about exploration, storytelling, and lore. Because these are things that a lot of games are doing sort of on the side. The idea being that you can play through Dark Souls and just experience Dark Souls. But you can also play through Dark Souls and then go watch a bunch of Vadividya and just dive deep into that game's lore, because there's thousands and thousands of hours of lore and speculation and lore theory for that game. It's the same thing with a game like Destiny. You can go really deep. Warframe, another one, you know. But a lot of that is optional, and not everyone's going to find that to be fun. Not everyone's going to be interested in that, so that's why I consider it kind of optional depth. Not everyone is going to do it. In fact, the majority of the players probably aren't going to spend that much time in Anthem's codex, but if you do, there is additional depth to be had within Anthem through the game's codex, or at least there could be. Now, when we talk about exploration, we know that there will be landmarks and things you can discover and sort of like, oh, hey, here's a landmark. Here's like a cool spot in the world. The thing that I'm curious about, outside of the visual appreciation of the world design, which is something I'm big on, is whether or not Anthem will have genuine surprises for us to discover in the open world. It's hard in an experience in 2019 where everyone just goes to Google and all of the hidden stuff gets discovered right away, but this is something that Bungie has honestly done really well over the years, is tuck and hide things away, make mysteries that the player has to discover, and they go well beyond just flying through like a passageway that no one has seen before and finding something on the other side. I hope Anthem has some of that, because I think that is what I like to refer to as community depth. It's something that the individual player can find, but more often than not, it takes a whole community to discover. And that's probably one of Bungie's strongest design elements, is that they recognize the power of the shared worlds we have on the internet now that exist alongside of the experiences developers are making. And they've essentially created a solution to that problem of people can find things too quickly. Well, if we make it really hard to find, then the community has to come together to solve it as one. It's not necessarily something that one individual is going to be able to figure out in just a day. So whether or not Anthem has stuff like that is to be seen, but I think that can provide a huge layer to the endgame experience for the community as a whole. And in a social game like Anthem, I think that's a very powerful tool. Ladies and gentlemen, that is my discussion on depth in Anthem. Please consider the things I said at the start of this video. Depth doesn't always consider fun. Fun isn't always necessarily tied to depth, and they can definitely conflict with one another. They can encourage one another. They can create issues for one another. I just think, in general, I like to encourage people to better understand terminology that we use when we're discussing video games. So hopefully this allows you to really rethink your use of the word and the terminology depth. If you have any other questions for me, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. As a huge heads up, I am streaming right now as this video is live on YouTube. I'm over on Twitch playing some Monster Hunter World. If you want to come hang out with us and chill, talk about Anthem, talk about whatever I have up for the daily discussion. I like to run a new discussion every single day that I stream, so get involved with some video game related goodness. You can totally do that. The link to my Twitch is right down in the pinned comment as well as the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, be awesome to one another, because at the end of the day, life's got a lot of depth.